friends, family, teachers, and stragglers. Today I'm giving a report on the frontal lobe and me, the connection between brain injury and personality, right? Hopefully we'll be able to illuminate also a few specs of the modern theories of the neuroscience of personality and emotions, but I'm going to talk about the frontal lobe injuries today because that is something which is close to my heart and to my brain. This is Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was just an ordinary railroad worker. But then one day, in September 1848, in Cavendish, Vermont, one of his things, right? Blue, right? Yes, I forgot the poem. A moral man, Phineas Gage, tamping powder down holes for his wage, blew the last of his probes through his two frontal lobes, right? The iron enters Gage's left cheek, pierces the base of his skull, traverses the front of his brain, and exits at high speed through the top of his head. Right? He wasn't unconscious, but he was probably shocked. They put him in a cart, but he was able to disembark himself. He was able to walk to the hospital. Right? He was able to do all this cool stuff. But there was one big difference, which is the end of the poem. Now he drinks, swears, and flies in a rage. People noted that Gage was no longer Gage. He was fine. He was able to walk, he was able to talk, he was able to be a regular person, he was even able to learn in a college with normal people. But something was very different about this guy. Right? Gage was no longer Gage. His personality changed. And this is crazy. He was able to walk, able to talk, able to formulate sentences, he was even smart. Right? But he was different. There was a major difference. That major difference, in the words, right, of the first doctor who researched him, or checked him out, his name was Harlow. He said, the equilibrium or balance, so to speak, between his intellectual faculty and animal propensities has been destroyed. He was now fitful, irreverent, indulgent at times, in the grossest profanity, which was not previously his custom, manifesting but little deference for his fellows, impatience of resistance or advice. Basically, he was a child in his intellectual capacity and manifestations, but he had the animal passions of a strong man. You know, the women were advised to stay away from him. He was crazy. He was a little bit different. Completely, he was normal, but something different about his mind, about his personality. The initial interpretation, which was a curious mixture of early psychology, early neuroscience, and practical philosophy, known as phrenology, where the understanding says that each part of your brain is responsible for a different cognitive skill, right? This is a tune, this is time, this is causality. They said that Gage was messed up, where he was damaged, veneration, benevolence, and comparison. His veneration, the reason that he cursed so much, the reason that he was so crude with women, the reason that I have the theory that maybe Gage was actually amazing with women, which is why they wanted to keep him away from them. But all of that comes from this idea of phrenology. Now, in the modern science, we understand that phrenology it's not that simple. The brain is not that simple, not that compartmentalized. But one important idea which came out of it, which is dissociation, which modern neuroscience agrees upon. Dissociation means that a person can have parts of his brain completely okay, parts of his brain is fine, but there are certain things which are dissociated and messed up, right? And that has made it even into the modern theory of neuroscience, which I'm going to talk about. The book that I read that inspired me to write this report is a book called Descartes' Error by Antonio Damasio. And he has a very interesting theory of emotions, okay? The neuroscientific theory of emotions. He identifies that there are two main hubs of that each facilitate a person's emotional life, right? There's the amygdala, which is known as the primitive brain, right? You can't really see, it's not such a good picture, or it's too big, but survival instinct. These are like what is called the primitive brain versus the executive brain, which is the frontal lobe, right? The amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. That is what Gage. So Gage, it went through his executive functioning part of his brain, the frontal lobe. But we'll get to that. But before we understand what exactly happened to Gage, we have to understand how emotions are developed. And so we're going to learn the theory of Antonio DiMaggio. Primary emotions, the lizard brain, right? This is the emotion, because babies can get afraid, babies can be happy, babies can be sad. But they can't, they can't form thoughts, they can't really have advanced adult human emotions. And so what they have to do, right, that comes from what's called the lizard brain, the amygdala, and through various tests on animals, different scientists studied the nexus between the amygdala, the interior cingulate, and the emotions. And this is the basic, this is where babies feel, this is where animals feel emotions. But there's another step, this is just the base mechanism of adult human emotions waiting to be processed, right? Secondary emotions. This comes from the neocortex, which is the most evolutionary neocortex, most evolutionary new part of our brains, which can feel that initial emotion when we get scared, when we get apprehensive, when we get afraid, when we get excited. But then we can process it through our brain with our executive functioning, right? It is that's what separates us from the hordes of unaware animals, right? This is what was damaged in Gage, and this is what the experts in self-awareness, right? The experts of self-awareness in our age, they call it bouncing off the walls when they get down some, right? Which I'm quoting, of course, one of the Gdolei Hador in self-awareness and the ability to express it, Eminem. And he just wasn't stable. The way that DiMaggio puts it is that the old brain core handles basic biological regulations down in the basement, while up above, the neocortex deliberates with wisdom and subtlety. Upstairs in the cortex there is reason and willpower, while downstairs in the subcortex there is emotion, all that weak, fleshy stuff. Right? This is what was messed up about Gage. The problem, right, that he was going through weird emotions. He was dealing with strange emotions. It wasn't clear, back then especially, that the connection between the brain and emotion, the mind-body problem. And so they didn't even have the foresight to get, they didn't have the technology to get an MRI. They didn't even have the foresight to do an autopsy. And so we don't really know what ended up happening with Gage's brain, and we were able to study it, but without really seeing the brain. Where scientists were able to kind of ascertain where the pole went and what it cut. We don't know for sure. If only we had a dashingly handsome, wildly self-aware, modern-day Phineas Gage, who can revolutionize modern neuroscience. My name is Shmuel. All right. So now, I'll tell you guys a little bit about my story. When I was 14, I was hit by a car, and it was crazy. I was on a bike. I was supposed to die. Without getting too much into the whole story, my sister called Hatzalah. She always gets mad at me when I don't say her name. I used to say this every year at the Thanksgiving meal. Now, for various reasons, where I am in my theology, I don't do that, but we'll do it here at a science without a meal. Science comment. So anyways, my sister got mad at me for not saying her name, so I just say Tali Herenstein, right? She called Hatzalah, and it happened to be that the guy who was doing Hatzalah, which is like the Jewish Red Cross in America, he was randomly like on a side street near my thing. Basically, he got the call, went right over. I was breathing. He got something in some apparatus to get me to breathe. He called someone, airlifted me from the nearby golf course to the hospital. They told my mom, if I live, I'm probably going to die. If I live, it will be blind, deaf, and mentally retarded, right? 2 brain surgeries, 198 stitches later, and here I am. This is a few months ago at a festival in the South. People called it miracles. People have said a lot of things have been going on. We're not talking about that. This is a science class, and also it wasn't good for me to hear a miracle, right? That's, again, it's not part of the science. It's just my own thing which is going on in my brain, which is actually a good, example of the kind of things that I have a million things always going on in my head, and I try to stay on point, but sometimes I get distracted. But this is not a report about my getting distracted. The one cognitive change the doctor told me about was something called disinhibition, which basically means that the normal human emotion of feeling awkward no longer applies to me. And that obviously caused a lot of social problems. And sometimes I look at it like I'm disabled, but sometimes I look at it like I have a superpower. So sometimes like socially I come off like a little bit like, what's with this guy? But also people are like, well, this guy's cool, this guy's different, there's something about this guy. And so different areas of my life have been harder, but other areas have been easier. But I'm not going to mention which ones or which, not yet, but eventually, maybe. Not today. Anyways, oh shoot, hold on. What else? Back to the, okay, and then current slide. Alright, so another crippling downside, right, because there were upsides which I wrote down, but I'm decided that I don't want to say them, right, keep a little bit of mystery. Because if this is seen by millions of people, I don't want everyone to know all of the deepest parts of my psyche and my soul. So I'll just talk about another crippling downside, which is my inability to modulate my emotions, which Olga, my